The Circuit of the Americas. It is a North American circuit with the least amount of endurance racing heritage, and yet despite that, we consider it to be the best location the World Endurance Championship could have chosen for its round in the US. There's plenty of iconic locations scattered across the United States of America where endurance racing cars would fit right in. Just think of Daytona and Sebring to name a few. But the WEC has now been to COTA on 8 previous occasions. The WEC has headed to the Texas circuit on a regular basis in recent years, but the track was missing from the calendar in 2018, 2019 and between 2021 and 2023. COTA is one of the newest circuits in the US that holds an international Grade 1 license. It was built primarily so Formula 1 could head to Texas, but then the WEC decided it wanted a piece of the cake, and it is now about to enter its 3rd consecutive year on the calendar. But what other locations did the WEC need to consider alongside COTA? Well, as you can probably imagine, there's several tracks the WEC could choose from when deciding on what venue to visit in the US. There's Daytona, Sebring, Laguna Seca and Watkins Glen to name a few. And that's before you even get to the other locations such as Road America and Lime Rock. But there's one common issue with all of them, and that is the fact that they are tracks where IMSA goes racing. As we've mentioned on a previous video of ours, it's become clear over the last several years that IMSA and the WEC do not want to share racing locations, especially on the same weekend. That's primarily because one will always detract from the other, and there will always be one party unhappy about the level of exposure their race has received or the impact it has had on who's competed in their race. It goes both ways. IMSA doesn't want to try and compete with the WEC, especially since several of the drivers race in both categories and would likely want to prioritise the World Championship. And for the WEC, it is already aware that it is almost impossible for its races to compete on some of IMSA's biggest weekends of the year, such as the Daytona 24 hours and Sebring 12 hours. COTA therefore provided a great alternative. It's a relatively new track that IMSA never goes to. It can have the circuit all to itself, host it at a time of the year when there's no conflict with the North American Championship, while also opening endurance racing up to a whole new fan base. On paper, it might have looked like the easy option for the WEC to make, but as we're coming on to now, there's definitely more to that than meets the eye. Given there's so many iconic endurance racing circuits in the US, it would be easy to sit here and say that the WEC is racing in the wrong location. There's so many other tracks that have huge endurance racing heritage, and it could be argued that the WEC is missing out on that. Imagine how excited fans would get to see WEC hypercars racing around Laguna Seca, for example. But on the other hand, it's not like the WEC hasn't tried to adopt those venues for itself in the past. Just look at Sebring. The WEC did head to the event on several occasions and lined its race alongside IMSA's, but it didn't work. And given the fact it didn't work at Sebring, one of the most iconic endurance racing locations in the world, it also suggests that it also wouldn't work at many of the other circuits either. Let's face it, nobody would be overly interested in the Daytona 6 hours just a few months after everyone has tackled the legendary and mammoth Rolex 24, now would they? And then there's the infrastructure. The WEC brings a different level of infrastructure compared to IMSA, and so capacity will also be a consideration at circuits like Laguna Seca, for example. It doesn't mean that the WEC couldn't race there, it's just that there's plenty of other considerations to factor in. But with COTA, there are no such issues at all. Capacity isn't a problem. This is a fairly modern circuit after all, and has been designed to cater for the likes of Formula 1. There's your first tick. F1 has also helped boost COTA's popularity, having proven to be a great circuit for racing single-seaters on. Therefore, it's attracted a whole new fan base who will be aware of COTA and how good the racing can be there. Thirdly, it's not a track that IMSA races at, and so it has the opportunity to make it a proper home for the World Championship in North America. There's also another aspect to consider. As always, the WEC is conscious about how much all of the travelling is costing teams and drivers. And given the fact that the round prior to COTA is Sao Paulo, it means that travel costs are also kept well in check too. But while on paper this all looks good for COTA, is the track any good for racing on? So, the location makes sense, but a smart calendar pick only matters if the track actually delivers, and this is where COTA earns it. Before we get into the actual racing itself, let's quickly talk about the circuit's layout. The first sector is made up of fast, twisting corners that make drivers feel like they're on the roller coaster of a lifetime. Then comes the second sector, which is all about straight line speed. And the third sector? Well, it's made up of a combination of slow, very technical corners coupled with some fast, sweeping curves. It therefore possesses all of the ingredients to make for great racing. And the racing at COTA usually is. There's no shortage of overtaking opportunities, and the layout poses a real challenge for drivers, meaning mistakes are a real possibility. As a result, the WEC is left with one of the most fascinating events of the season, and that's before you even get to the weather. Ordinarily, it's very hot and humid, as you might expect from being located in Texas. But as we witnessed last year, it can rain, and when it does, it rains hard. And that brings a whole new level of complications for the drivers. The heat will of course be a considerable challenge for the drivers alone, especially with temperatures averaging around 36 to 38 degrees centigrade when the championship heads there at the start of September. Then, when it does rain, the track becomes something of an ice rink, and drivers are forced to battle as hard as they can to keep all four wheels pointing in the right direction. Therefore, no matter what way you look at it, COTA has all of the ingredients for a fantastic race. Okay, it might not have the heritage and the history of locations such as Sebring or Watkins Glen, but how did those tracks get their heritage in the first place? It was by championships deciding to race there and then returning year after year. COTA might be missing that heritage right now, but if the WEC keeps it on the calendar for the long term, then that heritage will naturally build. And as far as we're concerned, it's a track that deserves its place on the calendar. It's a great circuit, creates great racing, and has real potential to become one of the iconic endurance racing events down the line. It just needs to be given a chance to flourish, and given time to build up its history. Allow it to do that, and nobody will even be questioning whether COTA really does have a place amongst the great US endurance racing circuits.